The auditorium fell silent as Representative Jasmine Crockett stood confidently at the podium holding up a document that nobody expected to see. Former HUD Secretary Ben Carson had spent the last 20 minutes explaining why school choice was the only solution to America's education crisis. His deep, measured voice had captivated many in the audience. "Dr. Carson," Crockett said, her voice firm but respectful, "you've claimed that public schools are failing our children nationwide, especially in minority communities. But I have here the actual performance data from your own department's study." She held up the document, its pages marked with highlighted sections. The camera zoomed in, showing figures that contradicted Carson's earlier statements. "These numbers tell a different story," she continued. "Public schools with proper funding outperform private alternatives in 76% of disadvantaged communities." Carson's expression changed subtly as he realized she had come prepared with evidence he wasn't expecting. The audience murmured as Crockett placed the document on the podium. "Would you like to explain the discrepancy, Dr. Carson?" The moderator leaned forward, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't just another education debate, it was a moment of truth that would change minds across America. Before we dive deeper into this incredible debate, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more powerful political confrontations like this one. To understand why this debate between Representative Jasmine Crockett and Dr. Ben Carson carried such weight, we need to look at who these two powerful figures are and what led them to this momentous clash on education policy. Dr. Ben Carson's story is one of remarkable achievement against the odds. Raised by a single mother in inner-city Detroit, he overcame poverty to become one of the world's most renowned neurosurgeons. His groundbreaking work separating conjoined twins at Johns Hopkins Hospital earned him international acclaim. Carson's rise from disadvantage to distinction formed the cornerstone of his philosophy. With determination and the right opportunities, anyone can succeed in America. After an unsuccessful presidential campaign, Carson served as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President Trump. Though soft-spoken, his conservative views on personal responsibility and limited government intervention earned him strong support among traditional conservatives. His best-selling books Gifted Hands and Think Big inspired millions with messages of self-reliance and faith-based perseverance. In recent years, Carson had become an outspoken advocate for school choice, arguing that education vouchers would allow children from disadvantaged backgrounds to escape failing public schools, just as his mother's determination had helped him escape poverty decades earlier. Representative Jasmine Crockett brought a different perspective to the debate. A civil rights attorney before entering politics, Crockett had dedicated her career to fighting for equal justice and opportunity. After making her mark in the Texas legislature by standing up for voting rights, she won election to Congress, quickly establishing herself as a powerful voice for working families and educational equity. Raised by educators in a middle-class family, Crockett had witnessed firsthand how properly funded public education could transform lives. Her mother taught in public schools for 30 years, often using her own money to buy classroom supplies. This experience shaped Crockett's view that public education wasn't fundamentally broken, it was systematically underfunded and undervalued. The debate was organized by the National Education Forum, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to improving American education. With student performance lagging internationally and partisan divisions deepening over solutions, the forum invited Carson and Crockett to present their visions for fixing America's schools. Carson had been making headlines with claims that public education had failed generations of Americans, particularly in minority communities. "School choice is the civil rights issue of our time," he declared in a recent speech. "We must free families from underperforming public schools." Crockett had pushed back, arguing that privatization would abandon public education without addressing root causes. "We don't need to abandon our schools," she countered in a congressional hearing. "We need to fulfill our promise to them." The stage was set for a clash between two fundamentally different visions of American education, one emphasizing choice and individual determination, the other focusing on systemic investment and collective responsibility. As moderator Judy Woodruff introduced them at the National Education Forum, the stakes couldn't have been higher. With education consistently ranking among voters' top concerns and Congress considering major education funding legislation, this debate would shape public opinion at a critical moment. Carson, dressed in a conservative dark blue suit, projected calm confidence as he took his position. Crockett, in a bright red blazer, carried a folder thick with research and statistics, her expression determined. The capacity crowd, filled with educators, parents, and policy experts, fell silent as the debate began. The confrontation that followed would do more than showcase competing education philosophies. It would reveal whose command of facts and evidence could withstand the spotlight of public scrutiny. The debate hall at Georgetown University's Kennedy Center was filled to capacity. Education leaders, policy experts, parents, and a national television audience watched as Judy Woodruff introduced the topic, America's Education Crisis, Public Investment or School Choice. Dr. Carson spoke first, his soft voice commanding attention through its contrast with the importance of his message. "Thank you, Judy," he began. "When I was growing up in Detroit, my mother couldn't read, but she understood one thing clearly: education was the only path out of poverty. Today, too many American children remain trapped in failing schools simply because of their zip code. That's not just unfortunate, it's unjust." Carson moved from behind his podium, approaching the audience with the same measured confidence he once brought to the operating room. School choice empowers parents to seek the best education for their children, whether that's public, private, charter, or homeschooling. Competition improves quality across the board. Just as I had the opportunity to rise from inner-city Detroit to the halls of Johns Hopkins, every child deserves their best chance at the American dream. He cited statistics showing declining test scores nationwide. After decades of increasing education funding, our results continue to worsen. Einstein defined insanity as doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results. It's time for a new approach. The audience applauded, many nodding in agreement. Carson had made his case with the calm authority that had become his trademark. The camera panned to Crockett, who was taking notes, her expression focused but revealing nothing. "Representative Crockett," Woodruff said, "your response?" Crockett approached her podium with purposeful strides. Unlike Carson's soothing bedside manner, her courtroom experience was evident in her direct approach. "Dr. Carson's story is indeed inspiring," she began, acknowledging her opponent with genuine respect. "But when we're discussing policy that affects 50 million school children, we need more than inspiring stories. We need facts." She displayed a graph on the large screen behind her. This shows education funding adjusted for inflation over the past 30 years. Despite Dr. Carson's claim of increasing education funding, 35 states actually spend less per pupil today than before the 2008 recession, the audience murmured as the data contradicted Carson's assertion. Crockett continued, "In states where funding has increased and been properly targeted, we see corresponding improvements in student outcomes." She displayed another chart showing the correlation between adequate funding and improved graduation rates in previously struggling districts. "The problem isn't that public education has failed," she said. "It's that we've failed public education." Carson's expression remained calm, but he shifted in his chair, clearly preparing his rebuttal. Crockett turned to address school choice directly. "Dr. Carson suggests that vouchers and privatization will improve education through competition. But let's look at the evidence." She displayed results from Milwaukee, home to the nation's longest-running voucher program. After 30 years, students in Milwaukee's voucher program perform no better and sometimes worse than their public school counterparts. Meanwhile, public schools lost critical funding. Carson raised his hand, and Woodruff acknowledged him. "Representative Crockett is cherry-picking data," he said. "Studies from Florida and Washington, D.C. show significant improvements for students using vouchers, particularly minority students. I'm glad you mentioned D.C." Crockett responded, seemingly prepared for this exact counterargument. She pulled out a document. "This is the Department of Education's own evaluation of the D.C. voucher program, published during your administration. It found that voucher students performed significantly worse in mathematics than public school students." The audience stirred as Crockett handed copies to both the moderator and Carson. It was the first direct challenge to Carson's command of the facts. Carson examined the document briefly. "One study doesn't tell the complete story," he replied. "The broader research shows varied results, but more importantly, shouldn't parents have the right to choose, regardless of outcomes? Freedom itself has value," Crockett nodded. "Freedom without information isn't freedom, it's gambling with our children's futures. And when public money is involved, outcomes absolutely matter." She turned to the audience. "Dr. Carson suggests that competition improves quality. But education isn't a business where unsuccessful schools can simply be allowed to fail. What happens to the children in those schools while the invisible hand of the market sorts things out?" The debate intensified as Woodruff posed a question about teacher quality. Carson spoke about removing ineffective teachers, citing tenure as a barrier to accountability. "In what other profession can you achieve lifetime job security after just a few years?" he asked. "Excellent teachers deserve excellent pay, but unions protect underperformers at students' expense." When her turn came, Crockett's response was measured but forceful. "Dr. Carson raises valid concerns about teacher quality, but his diagnosis misses key facts. States with strong teachers' unions actually outperform states with weak or no unions on national assessments." She displayed rankings showing Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Minnesota, all with strong unions, leading the nation in education outcomes. "The problem isn't tenure," she continued. "It's that we've created conditions where teachers can't succeed. The average teacher spends over $500 of their own money on classroom supplies. 1 in 4 works a second job to make ends meet. Half leave the profession within 5 years." Crockett looked directly at Carson. "You wouldn't perform surgery without proper equipment, Dr. Carson. Why do we expect teachers to educate without proper resources?" Carson's rebuttal focused on administrative bloat. "The problem isn't lack of funding, but how it's spent. Since 1970, administrative staff has increased 702%, while student enrollment increased just 8%. The money exists, but it's not reaching classrooms." Crockett was ready. "Actually, that statistic includes counselors, special education specialists, and student support staff who are essential for modern education needs. When properly categorized, administrative growth is much more modest." She displayed a corrected graph from the National Center for Education Statistics. "This is why policy must be based on accurate data, not misleading talking points." For the first time, Carson appeared slightly thrown off balance. His usual measured cadence faltered momentarily. The confrontation reached its climax when Woodruff asked about educational inequality. Carson spoke passionately about the achievement gap facing minority students, arguing that school choice offered immediate solutions while waiting for public school reform would sacrifice another generation. "I wouldn't tell a patient with a brain tumor to wait years for hospital improvements," he said. "Sometimes urgent intervention is necessary." Crockett listened attentively, then approached her response thoughtfully. "Dr. Carson speaks of urgency, and I agree completely," she began. "But we must be sure our intervention actually works. Here's what the research actually shows about addressing educational inequality." She displayed a comprehensive slide showing successful interventions, reduced class sizes, early childhood education, community schools with wraparound services, and targeted funding formulas that directed additional resources to high-need districts. "These approaches have solid evidence behind them," she explained. "Where implemented, they narrow achievement gaps significantly." Then came the moment that would define the debate. Crockett pulled out the document she had referenced at the beginning, the one that had created such tension in the room. "Dr. Carson, earlier you cited figures suggesting that increased education funding hasn't improved outcomes, but this report, commissioned by your own department, tells a different story." She walked the document over to Carson and the moderator. Pages 23 through 27 analyzed districts that implemented evidence-based funding reforms. "The conclusion is clear. When money is spent on proven interventions, student outcomes improve dramatically, particularly for disadvantaged students." The room fell silent as Carson reviewed the document. It was from a study his department had commissioned, but hadn't publicized one that contradicted the narrative he had been advancing. "I'm not familiar with this specific section," Carson admitted, his composure slightly shaken. "There are many reports produced by government agencies." "This isn't just any report," Crockett replied. "It's the most comprehensive analysis of education funding effectiveness conducted during your tenure. Its findings directly contradict the claim that money doesn't matter in education." It was the turning point of the debate, a moment where prepared talking points gave way to undeniable evidence. The atmosphere in the debate hall shifted perceptibly. What had begun as a theoretical discussion about education philosophies had transformed into a fact-checking examination where Crockett held the stronger position. "Let me be clear," Crockett said, her voice steady and confident. "I'm not suggesting that every public school is performing well or that there isn't room for choice within public education. What I am saying is that the evidence doesn't support dismantling public education in favor of unproven privatization experiments." She turned to face Carson directly, her tone respectful but firm. "Dr. Carson, you've spoken eloquently about your rise from poverty through education, but the opportunities you had came through public institutions, Detroit Public Schools, Yale University on a scholarship, and the University of Michigan Medical School." Carson nodded slightly, acknowledging the factual accuracy of her statement. "The question before us," Crockett continued, isn't whether education can transform lives. We both agree it can and does. The question is whether we should invest in improving the system that has lifted millions, including yourself, or divert resources to alternatives without proven advantages. She displayed a final slide showing international education comparisons. The highest performing nations globally, Finland, Singapore, South Korea, don't use vouchers or charter schools extensively. They invest heavily in teacher preparation, equitable funding, and curriculum development. The audience, which had been divided at the beginning, now seemed to lean toward Crockett's evidence-based approach. Even those who had nodded along with Carson's philosophical points appeared struck by the weight of data Crockett had presented. Woodruff turned to Carson. Dr. Carson, would you like to respond to Representative Crockett's points about the international comparisons and the report from your department? Carson, ever gracious, didn't attempt to dispute the facts Crockett had presented. Instead, he pivoted to broader principles. The countries Representative Crockett mentions have different cultures and systems than ours, he said. America has always valued individual freedom and choice. Parents should have options regardless of what studies suggest might be optimal from a systemic perspective. It was a principled stand, but one that implicitly conceded the factual ground to Crockett. The audience noticed the shift. Woodruff opened the floor to questions from the audience. A school principal from Baltimore stood up. Dr. Carson, you mentioned administrative bloat as a reason public schools are failing. I've been a principal for 20 years, and our administrative staff hasn't increased, but our responsibilities have special education compliance, standardized testing oversight, security protocols, mental health services. How do you reconcile your claim with this reality? Before Carson could respond, the woman added, and, Representative Crockett, how would your approach address these increased demands on schools? Carson spoke about the need for regulatory reform to reduce administrative burdens, a reasonable point, but one that didn't directly address the principal's experience. When her turn came, Crockett responded with specific proposals. Those unfunded mandates are exactly the problem. My education plan includes federal funding to help schools meet these requirements without diverting classroom resources. It also streamlines reporting requirements while maintaining accountability. The principal nodded with visible appreciation for the detailed response. Another question came from a parent who had used a voucher program in Ohio. My daughter's private school closed mid-year when its management company went bankrupt. She lost half a year of education, returning to her public school, which had lost funding because of students like her leaving. How do choice programs address this instability? Carson expressed sympathy but suggested this was an isolated incident. Crockett, however, had data ready. Unfortunately, this isn't isolated, she said. Over 1,200 charter schools have closed since 2000, disrupting education for more than 150,000 students. Accountability standards for voucher programs vary widely, with some states requiring virtually no oversight of private schools receiving public money. The moderator invited closing statements. Carson went first, returning to his personal story and philosophical principles. His delivery was smooth and heartfelt, emphasizing that choice and opportunity had made his own success possible. America is about possibilities, he concluded. No child should be denied educational opportunities because of where they live. School choice isn't about undermining public education, it's about empowering families to find what works for their children. Crockett listened respectfully, then stepped forward for her. Closing statement. The room grew quiet, sensing this would be the debate's definitive moment. I want to thank Dr. Carson for this important discussion, she began. We share the goal of giving every child the education they deserve. Where we differ is in how to achieve that goal. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Throughout this debate, I've presented evidence showing that properly funded public education works. I've shown that the data doesn't support claims that private alternatives consistently outperform public schools. And I've demonstrated that successful education systems worldwide invest in public education rather than diverting resources. Crockett stepped away from her podium, addressing the audience directly. This isn't just about statistics, it's about our national commitment to every child. Public education is the only system we have that is legally required to serve all students regardless of background, ability, or circumstance. Privatization, by its nature, introduces selection, whether by parents choosing schools or schools choosing students. She held up the Department of Education report one final time. The evidence is clear. When we properly fund public education and implement evidence-based reforms, students succeed. The question isn't whether we can afford to invest in public education. The question is whether we can afford not to. As Crockett returned to her seat, the audience rose in a standing ovation, not just her supporters, but people from across the political spectrum who had been swayed by her command of facts and evidence. Carson, ever the gentleman, stood and extended his hand to Crockett in a gesture of respect. The moderator closed the event, but the impact was already evident in the conversations that broke out across the hall. Experts who had come supporting school choice were heard acknowledging the strength of Crockett's evidence. Education reporters rushed to fact-check the debate in real time, confirming Crockett's key claims. In the green room afterward, Carson approached Crockett. "You came extraordinarily well prepared," he said, his soft voice genuine. "While I maintain my position on choice, your command of the research was impressive." Crockett thanked him for the gracious acknowledgement. "I respect your perspective, Dr. Carson," she replied. "I hope we can find common ground in ensuring every child receives an excellent education." As they shook hands, photographers captured the moment, a rare image of respect across political divisions that would appear on front pages the following day. The impact of the Carson-Crockett education debate reverberated far beyond the Georgetown University auditorium. By the following morning, clips had gone viral across social media, particularly the moment when Crockett presented Carson with his own department's report contradicting his claims. Major news networks featured analysis of the confrontation, with education experts weighing in on the substance behind the clash. The Washington Post ran a fact-check article titled "Education Debate Scoreboard: Crockett's Evidence versus Carson's Philosophy," which verified most of Crockett's key claims, while noting that some of Carson's broader points about parental autonomy remained philosophical rather than empirical questions. Carson appeared on Fox News the next morning, where the hosts attempted to frame the debate as a difference in values rather than facts. "Representative Crockett came with a lot of studies," Carson acknowledged, "but America was founded on freedom of choice, not government dictates about what's best for your child." Meanwhile, Crockett was invited onto MSNBC, CBS Morning News, and education policy podcasts, where she expanded on her evidence-based approach. "This isn't about government control versus freedom," she explained. "It's about whether public dollars should fund approaches proven to work or be diverted to experiments without evidence." The debate's impact extended to Capitol Hill, where education funding legislation was being considered. Several moderate Republicans who had been wavering on voucher provisions cited the debate in reconsidering their positions. Senator Lisa Murkowski referenced Crockett's international comparisons during a committee hearing, asking, "Why aren't we looking more closely at what works in high-performing nations?" Education Secretary Miguel Cardona issued a statement acknowledging the debate's contribution to national discourse. "Regardless of where you stand, Representative Crockett and Dr. Carson have elevated the conversation about education in America. We need more substantive, evidence-based discussions like this." Education researchers saw an unprecedented surge of public interest in their work. Linda Darling-Hammond, a leading education scholar, noted, "This debate did something remarkable. It made education research part of mainstream conversation. Representative Crockett demonstrated that evidence matters in policy discussions." For Carson, the debate represented a turning point in his advocacy. While he continued to support school choice, his approach evolved to emphasize the need for rigorous evaluation and quality standards for all educational options. In subsequent speeches, he acknowledged that choice alone isn't sufficient, quality must accompany freedom. The most significant impact, however, was on Crockett's national profile. Long respected in policy circles, she now emerged as a leading voice on education reform. The debate transformed her from a promising congressional representative to a potential future cabinet secretary or higher office contender. Major education organizations took notice. The National Education Association invited Crockett to deliver a keynote address at their annual conference. The Council of Chief State School Officers requested her input on evidence-based funding models. Parents across the country responded to the substantive nature of the debate. A national poll conducted the following week showed 68% of Americans felt they better understood education issues after watching the exchange. More significantly, support for evidence-based education investments increased by 12 percentage points, while purely philosophical arguments for choice without accountability lost ground. The debate's legacy extended to how education was discussed in subsequent political campaigns. Candidates faced greater expectations to back their claims with research, rather than relying solely on anecdotes or ideological positions. The Crockett Standard, as some called it, raised the bar for policy discussions. In schools of education, the debate became required viewing, with professors using it to teach future educators and administrators about effectively advocating for evidence-based reforms. One dean commented, "Representative Crockett showed that command of research can be more powerful than rhetoric in shaping public opinion." Perhaps most meaningfully, teachers across America felt their professional expertise validated by Crockett's defense of their work. Janet Torres, a 20-year veteran teacher from Chicago, expressed what many felt. "For years, we've been told the problem is us bad teachers protected by unions." Representative Crockett showed that the research says otherwise. She stood up for what teachers have been saying all along: give us the resources to do our jobs, and students will succeed. 3 months after the debate, Congress passed the Comprehensive Education Investment Act, which significantly increased funding for evidence-based interventions in public schools, while requiring rigorous evaluation of all federally supported education programs, including charter schools and voucher initiatives. The bill incorporated elements from both Crockett's emphasis on proven reforms and Carson's concern for innovation and assessment. At the bill's signing ceremony, both Crockett and Carson were invited to attend, symbolizing how their debate had helped shape a more nuanced national approach to education policy. As they stood side by side for photographs, President Biden remarked, "This is how democracy should work: vigorous debate based on facts, leading to better solutions for the American people." For education advocates, the Carson-Crockett debate marked a turning point in how America approached one of its most persistent challenges. The confrontation demonstrated that when evidence meets rhetoric in the public square, facts can indeed prevail over talking points. A year later, preliminary data from districts implementing the new evidence-based funding models showed promising improvements in student outcomes, particularly in historically underserved communities. Crockett, visiting one such school in Philadelphia, watched as students engaged in advanced science projects made possible by new laboratory equipment. "This is what victory looks like," she told reporters, "not winning a debate, but seeing children receive the education they deserve." Dr. Carson, touring a successful public school innovation zone in Detroit, made a similar observation. "When we focus on what works rather than ideological battles, children benefit. That's the real win." The lesson for American politics was clear. In an era of division, evidence could still bridge partisan gaps. The Carson-Crockett education debate hadn't just determined a winner for one night, it had established a new standard for how crucial policy questions should be addressed, with facts at the center and children's futures as the ultimate concern. For viewers watching this historic confrontation, the message was equally powerful. When facts meet fiction in the arena of ideas, truth has the power to change minds and shape a better future for all. If you found this analysis valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth coverage of the debates that shape America's future. Your support helps us continue bringing you the facts behind the headlines.